Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It is that time again. Time to open up the Diablo Digest. This being only the second time I've done this. Episode 2. What will we talk about today? I think we're going to talk about the 1.08 PTR. For the uninitiated, what I typically do is create a video regarding the PTR and covering all the patch notes for those who don't want to go out and find them or don't want to log into it itself. I'm going to integrate it into this because I think it does have some discussion points, and we'll see how this format works. So basically, unlike the last Diablo Digest, which was essentially a giant podcast with some random footage thrown in the background, this is going to be a patch notes video with a random podcast thrown in, I suppose. I'm not sure. We'll see as we go, and if it didn't make sense to you, it's okay. It didn't make sense to me, and I thought of it. So let's get started. I'm going to go over a few things. It's been a month, you realize, since the last one. Actually, I'm sure a lot of you do. So we've got quite a bit going on. I'm just trying to pick some more important stories, really, because I don't want to end up rambling for about 5 hours about the game. Although some of you may not care about that. You might actually be happy if I did that. But, you know, I do have to maintain my voice somehow. So the first things first, as I found as I was picking through the news articles on Diablo fans, which by the way is an excellent site and you should all go there, item drop changes are not going to be in 108. For anyone that has been following the news for Diablo, you may have heard that Blizzard wants to make it so that items drop a little less frequently. Not items in general, but kind of rare items. So you should see fewer blues, fewer yellows. And the reason for that is they're going to increase the stats that can drop on those items. So instead of, say, a 100 to 200 range, it might end up being 200 to 300, or say maybe 150 to 200. Something like that. They're going to increase the range so that you don't get as much crap. But that is not going to happen until sometime after 108. Not even sure if it's going to happen in 109. They've been very tight-lipped about what is going to happen with 109. They're not ready to discuss those plans yet. In the meantime, let's pull up a little article that I found quite amusing. This again posted on Diablo fans originally from joystick.com, where Jay Wilson talked about the auction house and how it, quote, really hurt the game, or at least really hurt is put in quotation marks on the article here. There's an excerpt here on Diablo fans, and I would suggest reading the entire thing. But for the article it says, but he said that once the game went live, Blizzard realized it was completely wrong about those last 2 points. It turns out that nearly every one of the game's players, of which there are still about 1 million per day and about 3 million per month according to Wilson, made use of either auction house, and that over 50% of players used it regularly. That, said Wilson, made money a much higher motivator than the game's original motivation to simply kill Diablo and damaged item rewards in the game. When a lot of the buzz around the game attacked the real money auction house, gold does much more damage than the other one does, according to Wilson, because more players use it and the prices fluctuate much more. I think we would turn it off if we could, Wilson said during his talk, but the problem is not as easy as that. With all of Blizzard's current players, he says the company has no idea how many players like the system or hate it. This is important, and I think this really shows how an idea that is simple in design and seems like it might be a very obvious idea to do. Like, for example, we take the auction house of Diablo 3. And why was this added in? Well, because people were trading items in Diablo 2, albeit behind the scenes third-party sites. And of course this had implications and problems, that there could be shady business going on there. Of course, most players gravitated to sites they trusted, so I don't know if that was really a big deal, but it was something that Blizzard was concerned about. So they're like, well, why don't we add our own? And so yeah, that worked. And so in their initial testing of Diablo 3 internally, Diablo 3 was a very different game to the developers. I mean, they talked about having hard times getting through Inferno. They talked about how passives such as the Monks won with everything didn't seem like a big deal to them because, well, they were finding their items. They didn't have millions of people sitting there dropping items into an auction house to make it very easy to get the gear that they wanted explicitly. So One With Everything didn't seem like it was that attractive in the beginning, and then once they realized how players could go and get these items, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Players are going out to the auction house rather than going out and finding stuff, and it's really killing the in-game grind that they envisioned. They thought people would be grinding for items a lot longer than they did. And it's interesting to see that right away. I mean, right after turning that on, they knew what had happened. They knew what kind of beast they had unleashed upon the game. So why didn't they fix it right away, you might ask? And I think really at that point you can't. You just really can't. Think of the millions of people that are playing the game, and there are people that like the auction house. There was a poll on Diablo fans, and I'm sure there was a poll on the official forums regarding turning off the auction house. All right, people do like it. When you look at the polls, the last time I looked at the poll results, a majority of people said keep the auction house. Some people said just remove the real money auction house. And some said they just want tweaks to items or something like that. It was very rare that people said, no, I hate it, just turn it off. Most people said they liked it or felt that it could use some changes to make it likable. I think that's very important. It tells you that it's not the grand evil that we all like to think it is. Now, I think it does kill the progression game, and I think the game probably would have been better off without it in the long run, and we'll have to see what happens to the console version, which is not going to have an auction house. But if you've got people that use it, you've got people that like it, and that's the problem. Even they have a hard time telling if people would love it or hate it. But if you look at polls, it suggests that people would like it with just some tweaks. But polls are not the be-all, end-all. After all, not all of your players are going to come to the forums. Not all of your players are going to go to a fan forum like Diablo fans. And most certainly, only a fraction of those are going to be voting. Typically, it's the people that are very passionate, that want to know the up-to-the-minute updates and things like that go to forums, fan forums, official forums, and do that kind of thing. So you kind of get skewed numbers there. It's almost like the Nielsen ratings for TV shows. Those things are honestly quite archaic and outdated, if you ask me. You're basically take an exceptionally small sample size and make decisions based on that. It's weird, really. It's... what do you do? You know, how do you fix that problem other than going back in time and turning it off before it ever happened? And I agree with Jay on this, that the gold auction house is probably the worst problem, not the real money auction house. Gold is always going into the system as our items and all that. The real money auction house, you know, sure, that's fine and dandy. People can spend real money to get items, but the truth is there's so much trading of items, even on the gold auction house, that if the real money auction house wasn't there, I don't think it would change much. I really don't. It would certainly change the prices around a little bit, because obviously the connection of gold to real money would be gone as well, because you could just trade gold for real money. But I think there would still be a problem with the trading and people getting the exact items that they want to get the perfect stats that they want without having to go out and find it. Due to these problems, by the way, they have stated that they are not going to make a web version of the auction house. Some people have been asking for this. This goes on along with the people actually liking it. Some people like it so much that they actually want to be able to track their auctions while not playing the game. And Blizzard flat out stated that, you know what, we feel that the auction house causes problems with itemization, with in-game, with basically the in-game grind and whatnot. We don't feel that this is conducive to the gameplay experience that we want. So we're not going to do that. And I am glad to hear them say that, actually, because it's something they very easily could have done. Look at World of Warcraft. They've got that online armory app, and they put auction house functionality into that. Of course, World of Warcraft is a very fundamentally different game, and people are always striving to get really good equipment in order to complete harder and harder challenges. So there's usually a reason for having really good gear. Not only just getting the gear from raiding, but that also means, too, that the best items are only available from raiding. But there's a lot more you can do in that game once you've gotten that gear cap that the auction house will allow you to get. Continuing along with items here, there was a thread talking about making shields viable again. So what's going on here? Well, it seems that with the lowering of difficulty of Inferno, even with monster power, Blizzard is finding that people are gravitating away from using shields or sword and board or whatever you want to call it. I mean, because anyone can use a shield, right? A wizard can, a witch doctor can, everybody. Demon hunters can with a one-handed crossbow. That's fine. And they were more important a while back when the game was really hard and people needed defensive stats in order to survive Inferno. Well, now that Inferno is a bit easier and damage is kind of the thing to do. It was for a while as well, but sometimes survivability was needed. So Blizzard is asking for suggestions on their official forums as to what can they do to make shields viable again. That's a really good question. And that's really hard to answer. When you think about it, barbarians, let's see, barbarians, they could dual wield, so they really don't need a shield. They can use two hands, they can't use a shield then. Sword and board just, kind of seems like an outdated concept, though they could still do it. Wizards, they would probably rather have a wizard orb, which is going to give them stats that they want. Witch doctors, you've got your focuses, your offhand juju things. It seems like anything that shields can do, class items can do better. So what would they do? I think that's a really good question. And maybe, just maybe, if they took shields, right? They're thinking about adding very specific random procs to Legendaries. What if they created a subset of procs, things that would happen when you either hit or got hit, that could only occur on shields? Do you think that would be a good idea? I'm really interested to get feedback on that one. I want to see what you guys think. Obviously the best place to post would be the official forums where they are asking this question. But if anyone wanted to stop by and leave a comment or something here, by all means, because I wonder about that. The only thing I can come up with is that idea. Just maybe make it so that you have some very defensive-minded procs or just random procs. Something that would make it really interesting to have a shield compared to something else. That's possible. Should they increase maybe the defensive capabilities of a shield to make it very competitive over damage? Because you might look at it and say, oh wait, this shield could make me survive one of those instant death blows that one of those hammer guardians would do or something. I don't know. Maybe that would be too much. Definitely an idea worthy of discussion, and I'm glad Blizzard is looking for ideas. And please don't mistake this for thinking that Blizzard doesn't have ideas. Because they certainly do, but what they like to do is they like to take their ideas and then they like to see what the community has to offer as well. They really like to know what we have to say because what they can do is a merger of their own ideas and ours, and it usually creates a nice cohesive balance between the two, and sometimes ends up creating something very unique that either side wasn't anticipating. Just because people look for feedback and are looking for ideas doesn't mean that they're out of their own. I'm sure Blizzard has quite a few ideas backlogged. Thing is they really want to see where the community's suggestions go, because it'll also help them decide on which ideas of theirs might be better for what the fan base wants to see. Alright, let's continue to another thing that was talked about recently, and this is a change that will not happen until the future. This is Wrath of the Berserker and Archon. Fixes coming down the line in the future. Possibly not even in 109, but we're talking very long term here. What's wrong with Wrath of the Berserker and Archon, you might ask? Everybody loves those skills. Well, the problem is those skills are augmented by the Whirlwind build for Barbarians, which uses basically... what is that rune? You got the rune that basically lets Wrath of the Berserker last longer the more rage you get. And that pretty much allows you to keep it on permanently with the right build, pretty much the Whirlwind build. And with Archon, it's all about critical mass. You keep using critical mass and your uptime on Archon just keeps going up. You're going to be in those modes practically forever. And so what Blizzard has said is, we like these abilities, but they were designed to be very quick bursts of power that made it feel like you were going to be very strong for a moment. It was supposed to help you in tough situations or just be this really cool thing you could do every now and then to do a whole bunch of damage. And the problem has become that they have so near 100% uptime that they don't feel special anymore. And I agree with that. I mean, I look at these things that are supposed to have long cooldowns and all of a sudden they're permanent. Now, they're great builds, and honestly, I think that's kind of cool that people can game that system a bit. But again, it almost makes it feel like if you're going to make a Wrath of the Berserker build, or if you're going to make an Archon build, you might as well be getting the cooldown reductions. It almost makes it feel mandatory if you want to use one of those two abilities. So I kind of agree with them on that. Obviously, what the last thing they want to do is to make it so that they completely kill builds that are using them right now. So they're not trying to kill critical mass wizards, and trust me, people have accused Blizzard of doing that. When they nerfed the coefficient on the tornadoes, you know, things like that, people think that they want to kill the build. No, if they wanted to kill the build, they would do it. They could completely make your Wrath of the Berserker and your Archon completely useless in either one of those scenarios if that is what they wanted to do, and it is not what they want to do. But they want to make those abilities feel more impressive than they are. Not feel mandatory, not feel like, ho-hum, I'm, always Archon. They want it to feel powerful and enabling when you are in that form, not feel detrimental when you are not in that form. And that's a very important distinction to make. Alright, that covers the miscellaneous news. From here, I would like to quickly cover the Ask the Devs. We have two parts of Ask the Devs. Round 1 and 2 have been answered, and there will be more down the line, from what I understand. There's not a lot here. I want to go over some of the ones that seem more interesting to me. I'll probably cover a little bit all of them. I'll gloss over the ones that aren't as interesting. So what do we have under Ask the Devs 1? People asking, will all legendaries found on Inferno roll 63 base stat values? As we know, Inferno has all monsters and containers be level 63 due to monster power. And the new changes to legendaries will be that they will gain stats based on the item level of the container they're being dropped out of. So a legendary that used to be a level 15 legendary can now roll as a level 63 legendary with improved stats. That's what's going to happen. Not in 108, not in the one that's on the PTR now, and possibly not even in 109. We don't know yet. But that's what they plan to do. And the answer, of course, to that is yes. Will these be dropping 63 stats? Yes, they will be dropping the stats that are equal to that level. So, for example, in the next question, they talk about Leoric's Signet, and it's a level 17 ring. Can it drop as a 63? And does it mean that every set and legendary item will every possible set and legendary item be dropping in Inferno? And they say yes. Every legendary will unlock at a certain point, just like it does now. See, my assumption was they were going to make it so that legendaries will scale backwards as well. I was kind of hoping it would, so you could have more low-level legendaries, which I feel the game desperately needs. I think it would be cool if they did that, but it doesn't look like they're going to. So instead, what they're going to do is they're going to keep the current legendary progression. So Leoric's Signet, for example, it's a level 17 ring, right? So once it gets you a monster level 17 environment, that's when it's going to start dropping. It won't drop any sooner than that. But after that point, its level will go up with the level of the containers you're finding stuff in. So what that means is, as you play the game, your pool of legendary items and set items that can possibly drop increases constantly. So that should make it so that we see a lot more legendaries and items dropping in the end game at level 60, and possibly more interesting ones, because some of the more interesting legendaries were also low-level legendaries. So we might see some very cool changes there, and maybe even some build changes come about by that once this change goes live. People asking about, will there be a way for players to have some control over item stats, such as implementing the Mystic? Okay, let me see. Dawn here. Who is Dawn? I didn't miss that. Dawn Vu. He's the associate game designer. This was also done by Travis Day and Wyatt Cheng. Travis Day being the game designer and Wyatt Cheng being senior technical game designer. This question was answered by Dawn Vu, the associate game designer. Let's go back down. Okay, so he says, giving players more control and customization of their items' stats is something we talk about a lot in our office. There have been a lot of ideas thrown around here and some great suggestions from the community, but we have not finalized any system yet. To give an idea of the direction we're heading towards, though, here are just a few ideas that we're considering right now. 1. The ability to change a portion of a particular stat on an existing item to another stat of your choice. Okay. That is a system very similar to World of Warcraft right now. They have a... I can't even remember what you call it now. There was an item stat change thing that they added in Cataclysm where you can take a percentage of one stat and add it to another stat. I believe what it was is a conversion of you would take half of one stat and then apply that rating to the other stats. And it's a kind of cool system. It works well in World of Warcraft because you typically have a very specific build with very specific stats you're looking for. And it made it so that when you found loot in a raid that could possibly be an upgrade for you, but it just had the wrong stat, you could add that stat to it, which is kind of nice, although I'm just not sure it would find its place here in Diablo. Again, Diablo is being all about randomized loot. It's far more random than World of Warcraft. All of the loot in that game is mostly predetermined. So the next item is number 2, the ability to augment an existing item with a stat bonus of your choice. Number 3, the ability to create an item with one or several fixed affixes, similar to the rare recipes in 107. Let me stop there. Again, the ability to create an item with one of several fixed affixes. You know what? That is an interesting idea. And I want to talk about this, because this is something that very much disappointed me when the game went live. When I was in the beta, the crafting in Diablo 3 seemed like it was going to be so much better to me than it turned out to be. It's why I like the system and why I made a video tutorial series on it, even though afterwards I found out it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So back in beta, when you crafted something, each item that you crafted had one affix that was guaranteed. For example, swords, I believe, typically had attack speed. Axes typically had increased critical strike chance. A two-handed axe might have a guaranteed strength roll. Things like that. Each of these items had a guaranteed stat when you crafted it. So you were looking at like attack speed, critical strike, maybe a raw stat, things like that. And I thought that was kind of neat. It would allow you to choose between what kind of weapons you wanted, and the difference between the weapons would be what kind of base stats there are. This is something that I feel that Path of Exile does particularly well. In their game, each weapon has a very specific thing that it does. Staves might give you an increased chance to block. Wands will give you increased spell damage as a base stat that is always on a wand. Daggers increase your global critical strike chance. Claws will always have life on hit or life leech. You know, there's so many different properties there that are guaranteed for a particular set of items, and I feel that they missed out on something there. It was there. The infrastructure was in the beta on the crafting system, and they turned it off. Because in one of the last beta releases before the game went live, they took that all out in favor of 100% randomization. And at first I thought that was kind of cool until I started playing through, and now that I've been through the game several times, I kind of realized, well, now it sucks that we don't have that, because what's the point of crafting? Well, that in the auction house kind of kills the whole point of crafting, because people are trading stuff all the time, and a lot of it gets kind of cheap. So why not have it so that certain affixes happen on certain weapons only? I mean, there was talk about, I believe I talked about this in the last Diablo Digest, of having it so that certain weapon stats would be mutually exclusive. For example, if an item rolled with critical strike chance, it might not roll with attack speed, or it might not roll with critical strike damage, or something like that. To put them into categories so they can't roll together. It almost makes me think maybe that wouldn't be a bad idea, and then maybe take it a step further and apply it to different weapons. That would be interesting. At this point in the game, though, it kind of seems like that would be a very hard thing to do and a very hard sell, especially to Blizzard, who doesn't like to change around items that people have that much, especially when there's a real money auction house involved people may have paid money for. they don't like to mess with people's existing builds and existing items. And I think, again, this is something the auction house has really struggled to really change the face of the game. I mean, this one simple concept of the auction house, as I started saying in the beginning of this whole thing, one simple change, one simple feature can change the historic landscape forever. And that's what the auction house has done. So when they want to do a drastic change, they can't justify it to themselves. And they can't justify it to the people that are spending money. Because people like to do that. So they can't reasonably sit there and say, we're going to make this drastic change. Oh, but what about that guy that spent $250 on an item that this is going to completely kill? So what that usually does is means that anytime they do make a change, for example, the change to black weapons, which happened recently, they have fixed the bugs with black weapons, but it doesn't affect the old weapons, it only affects the new. That is their middle ground. That is how they deal with that. They say, here, we're going to change it, we're going to fix it, but it's only going to be on the new stuff. Of course, that means that the old stuff is still out there and still being traded. And that just makes it so it seems like the auction house becomes this giant albatross or sword of Damocles over their heads. You know, it's basically this thing that sits there and says to them, you better think long and hard about what you're going to do in your next design decision. And this goes into the whole drop rates of rare items. They're going to reduce the drop rates of rare items. Right away, someone's like, hey, you know, that's going to affect crafting. That's going to affect auction house. The crafting probably being the biggest one because people are used to having a whole bunch of yellows to salvage, you know? So you're going to get all the stuff you need. And reduced items means you get less of that. So they're going to have to think long and hard about that. You've got that very real synergy of systems in this game. That if you change any one of them, you could inadvertently change all of them and change everything in a way that you didn't mean to. Okay, I've deviated from the original topic a little bit. Let's go back because there was one more item they discussed that they were towards things they were heading towards. And this is also discussed adding other types of socketables with a wide variety of possible affixes that you can put in socketed items instead of gems. That is great. So we're basically almost talking about runes again. And this is something that I think they've really needed to look at because quite honestly, 4 gems is boring. Boring as hell. Seriously, I look at the gem system and I'm like, oh great, strength, dex, int, and vitality. Yay. What happened to the other stuff? You know, what happened to more gems that gave you different types of procs? I think they really went into this idea that they wanted to simplify the stats to make it easier to understand, and I think they went too far. Talked about this a little bit in the forums where there was actually someone that wasn't bashing Jay Wilson for a change. And he talked about the decisions that they made seemed, you know, like he had a lot of decent ideas, but, you know, there's something about the execution, and I kind of agreed with that. I'm like, you know, the idea to simplify the stats into something like just primary stats like that, the idea to simplify the stats was not necessarily a bad one. But it seems like they took that and they just ran with it and they went too far with it. You know, they wanted to make the game very streamlined, and this goes back to that conversation I had about making the game very efficient, and it just went too far, and now it's just this straight, there's one way to do it, and there's only one way to do it. So all the variety that made Diablo 2 special, and I'm not talking about skill trees, I'm just talking about items. Because I actually like the skill tree system of Diablo 3. But the items just really don't sell the game anymore. And so this looks like to be the one area they have to focus on, and they are focusing on it. So all the permanent systems have positive and negatives, so they want to make sure that they make the right choice and consider all other changes they plan on making before deciding which systems they want to implement. As far as the Mystic goes, she's a cunning lady, and we haven't seen the last of her. Expansion pack. We'll have to see where she comes in. Question, where's my add socket? Well, when the game was in development, they wanted the blacksmith to have the ability to add a socket to the item. Adding a socket makes the item better, so you pretty much always wanted to do it, and we found that adding a socket felt like a small chore that didn't actually increase the gameplay depth. You already need to insert gems into a socket item, and felt having to add a socket as well would be a step too many. You know, and I can kind of understand that. And it also makes it so that socketable items kind of become a desire to have, you know, so that if it didn't have a socket, you felt you had to add it, and if it did, then you didn't. Yeah, I think they maybe went in the right direction with that one. Let's see, will there be new craftable items added in the future? Thinking of weapons and or legendary items. Wyatt says that it's hard to say for sure, but I don't see any reason why not. We may revisit items in general. We'll be looking at how crafting fits into the big picture, and it's certainly possible that we'll add more recipes at that time. Alright, and a plan to reduce the number of dropped items but increasing their quality results in smaller amount of items that can be salvaged. That is the last question, and we've already covered that. So yes, they will be looking into that. The next Ask the Devs had a few... Let's take a look here. What have we got here? Can class-specific items have guaranteed class-specific stats? Travis talked about that one. Moving on to his last statement, he talks about things like quivers rolling primary stats as strength doesn't really play any role. However, they don't want to remove randomness completely and have it be a foregone conclusion that every quiver you pick up will roll with the exact stats you want. So while they are changing it so that class-specific items can't roll primary values of a different class stat, that doesn't mean you will never see plus strength on a quiver. Okay, so what he's getting at here is what they're going to do is they're going to make it so that a class item, like a Witch Doctor's, you know, offhand, Wizard's Focus, you get the idea, Quiver for Demon Hunter. That item will never have a primary stat of another class. So you're not going to see a quiver with strength. You're not going to see a quiver with intelligence as a primary stat. Keep that in mind. Remember, there are hybrid stats. There are affixes in the game that will add like a certain amount of strength and dexterity at the same time. It looks like they're two different stat rolls, but the truth of the matter is it was one roll, and that's why you end up with something that you think it should have 100 strength, but it had 50 strength, 50 dex. That's because it rolled a hybrid stat. So instead of all the full 100, you were getting half and half, 50-50. So what you might see is some things like a quiver that does have strength, but it's going to be a small amount of strength because what actually happened was it rolled the strength dexterity stat instead. So that's a step in the right direction. Glad to see that. Here's an interesting one. They talked about game-changing items in their most recent legendary blogs and whatnot. But they only mentioned gimmicks that affect certain skills or builds, according to this poster here. There's a reason people choose best in slot items. These items allow for the greatest damage and survivability possible so that the player can efficiently farm as high of a monster power as they can, since damage affects any build out there, usually, to the greatest extent. Would there be any reason of choosing anything besides best in slot items? So Travis Day goes on to say that best in slot is a subjective term. What is best for one class or playstyle isn't necessarily the best for everyone. Currently, itemization has the problem that it is largely supported by a handful of fixes that increase your damage in varying degrees, because almost all items can very easily be distilled down to their DPS value, and it quickly turns into a numbers game. This is a side effect of the fact that there really aren't any items that provide intangible benefits beyond raw damage. It's also an issue because there are no items that can improve your play experience or efficiency other than those simply increasing your character sheet DPS. We have plans to try and create more interesting item choices and have talked a bit about what those plans are in Travis Day's previous blog, if you want to take a look at that. There will be a best in slot item for a particular build or particular class, probably. But that's never really been the problem. There will always be best in slot items for specific builds and setups. The problem today is that we have items that are universally best in slot, regardless of your class or build. Right now, items that are best in slot for a demon hunter are probably also the best in slot for a monk, and that is one of the biggest things they're looking to address. And amen to that. That is really the problem. Universal best in slot. And you know, best in slot, I agree with him. That's subjective. It depends on your build. Depends on what you're going for. And some of the really cool ideas they've thrown around for legendaries could very much become best in slot for a very unique build. If you've got this item that does some kind of wonky thing when you get hit, or when you use a particular skill, that can change builds around dramatically, and then that might become best in slot. people are looking at this as, well, best in slot is only high damage numbers. That's not entirely true. If they do the items right, it won't be. Because it certainly wasn't true in Diablo 2, as far as I remember. I mean, there were certainly items that were super good and like god tier items. Usually those involved rune words. Usually. And were pretty hard to get. For the most part, there were a lot of items that could be used differently based on whatever kind of build you wanted. A question whether or not gray items or white items will become more valuable, because people talking about how there's so many items that drop, and it kind of sucks to see all these items that they're never going to use. Wyatt Chang basically goes on to say that they do not want to really make those items become more important, because it becomes a universal law of Diablo to make you feel like the blue and yellow items are actually rare and items that you will desire. To make the lower items become more desirable would kind of cheapen that effect in a way. So they do not plan to really do that, although they are always looking at options. So if there's anything they could do to make some of the lower items possibly feel better, they might, only in minor ways. So they plan on excluding Magic Find and Gold Find affixes from gear. Well, they're still trying to find a solution for Magic Find and Gold Find. In the past, they talked about removing it from gear, reducing the effectiveness, lowering the cap, or implementing diminishing returns. They say the problem with Magic Find specifically is that it makes it really difficult to design a game that feels rewarding to all of our players instead of just some of them. When players first started getting to max level in farming Inferno, they used to get a lot of feedback saying, I haven't found a single legendary item yet. Other people who say, I found one legendary an hour, and the difference was really how much Magic Find they were stacking. Well, they like the idea of Magic Find because it allows players the option of customizing their character for item finding. They don't like that in many situations it feels mandatory, and they also want players to feel like their time playing Diablo 3 is always rewarding. Having a Magic Find discrepancy of up to 300% between players makes that incredibly hard from a design perspective. So you know what, I don't disagree with that, and as much as I kind of liked having Magic Find gear, I never really fully stacked it, and for that reason alone is because it would kill your survivability or your damage in one way or the other, and it always felt bad to make that choice. And I agree that it sucks to sit there and spend a lot of time playing the game and never finding something good. Not finding a lot of legendaries. I feel that the system they have in place now, especially with the Nephilim Valor, the Monster Power, and all that giving you rewards to your Magic Find, is honestly probably one of the best directions they've taken. Because it allows you to increase your Magic Find potential through harder difficulties, even though lower difficulties is a bit more efficient. And the drop rates of legendaries have felt pretty good. I won't always find one every session, but sometimes I'll get lucky and find a couple. And it's got a nice balancing effect, and I feel that it happens just often enough to feel good. Alright, here we had a question about black weapon damage, I believe. Let's see, question about weapon types. Are you going to change how weapon types work in the future past? No, okay. We talked about this a little bit already. The minor improved attack speed is different from each weapon. Current weapon types are boring because each weapon doesn't have specific bonus or ability. Players tend to seek weapons with higher DPS numbers, desirable stats, even if it's a dagger. At least in D2, blunt weapons did additional damage to undead classes. I am expecting some differences for each weapon. For example, a spear weapon will increase the range of the character's skill, or a mace does additional damage against undead, etc., etc. And they also ask you if elemental weapons will be more useful in a future patch. So Travis Day on this one says, applying innate benefits to each weapon type gets brought up a lot. And I can understand why it does, by the way. I mean, like I said, I brought up some examples there about Path of Exile. Examples that I feel that could be useful for the game. So he goes on to say, while we don't currently have plans to make each weapon do something different, it isn't off the table. At the heart of that question, though, is a desire for weapons to be more than just DPS number, and that's something they would like to add. It's most likely going to come in the form of elemental damage. Elemental damage is something they're actively trying to find a good solution for. The stat already exists in the game, but currently it's 6 different flavors of the same affix. Cold is the only exception in that it snares targets. One thing they're actively discussing is what kind of effects they could associate with each element, and then add it to not only weapons, but all damage sources of that type, and they haven't finalized anything. I'm glad he's talking about that, and I know it kind of jumped around a bit to go down this question and answer thing. Unfortunately, in the structure that they're given, it was just happened to be I talked about this before getting to the question, so I apologize for that. I am, as you can tell, I'm trying to keep this a bit more structured than the previous one. But obviously I'm failing. Anyway, this is good. This is good discussion because really I was kind of surprised when they took out the differences between elemental damages because there were differences originally planned in the release of Diablo 3. And then they removed it. For example, poison damage would do a dot. Fire damage might make them burn. You know, Path of Exile does different weapons. Again, you know, I keep going back to that because I think there's a good comparison to be made here. Path of Exile and Diablo 3 have different, you know, these different ideas behind how this stuff works. And some of it's good, some of it's bad. But it's always good to bring up the competition when you're talking about these things so you can see how it works with other games and see if it would be a fit for Diablo 3. I think they could do something. It'd be interesting to see what kind of effects they make. You know, maybe they could do it an on-proc system or something like that, like a lightning damage. Every now and then, lightning damage might proc some kind of, maybe an AoE burst, you know, like a shock nova or something around the target that you hit or something, you know, something to just make it unique. It doesn't have to be a, oh, hey, you just did a little extra damage. I'll be interested to see what they do. I really hope they continue to discuss that because I think it could help. Alright, so beyond that, they moved on to the damage disproportion between physical and elemental weapons. This goes along with the black weapons. I'm not going to read all of this, as I already pretty much talked a little bit about this. They have fixed the black damage bug. People were asking, why did you do this? What was the intent? And they're like, well, we didn't intend that. It was a bug. We had a hard time finding it. Once we did find it, we didn't want to change all the items that people had. And again, we talked about that already, being influenced by auction house and trading. So yeah, that's all fixed. We'll move on to the next question. Simple but important question. Are you going to try to devaluate the critical damage to be less affecting overall player damage? Right now it's absurdly high compared to normal white damage. Every build is centered around these two stats. Travis says there's no current plans to devalue critical damage, and yes, it's one of the single largest DPS increasing stats in the game across all classes, but that's not necessarily a problem. The real problem is that critical damage is the only thing that all players want, and they need to try and address that. It goes back to creating more diverse item types. Lastly, they said Diablo 2 had one-time quest rewards. Are they planning on adding anything like that? And the answer to that is pretty much no. They think they were cool but could be burdensome, and they even though they might give you something like permanent resists, but really all those were artificial gameplay, and your resists were permanently reduced anyway, so it was almost like giving you a portion of that back to offset it. So they did talk about having the idea of customizing items, though, and giving players more opportunities to feel invested in what they're equipping. They talked about things like the ability to change a portion of a particular stat, augment existing items. So yeah, that goes back to exactly what they talked about. I already mentioned all of those. Previous section here. Alright, definitely going a lot longer than I had intended. Honestly, at this point, it's up to the PTR patch results. Let's just go over these pretty quickly. A lot of changes here. Even though when it first came out, it didn't seem like there was a lot of changes. A lot of it was under the hood. The biggest thing about this is that they added the monster density, which hopefully in the background, if I've done my job, you would have seen a few different videos running through different areas with monster density levels you can see in each area that they've improved. Allow me to state that when I heard about monster density changes happening in this game, I was skeptical. I felt, oh boy, here's just going to be another way to make some kind of new, more efficient path to happen in an earlier act rather than Act 3. Does this really need to happen? And then I was concerned about them adding options like the monster power. Like, okay, you can choose Inferno, monster power, 1 through 10, and then monster density, 1 through 10. You know, like, wait, that's just too many options. Who's going to want to go through that? So apparently their answer to that was they're just going to increase the levels of Inferno with monster power turned on, not... if you have monster power turned off, it doesn't increase the density. So that's cool. And as I've played through it, I gotta say I'm impressed. It actually changes the feel of the game. You know, and it's not just about efficiency there. I mean, it really feels like the areas have a life to them that wasn't there before. And it does increase some of the challenge. And it does make things just overall as a whole more interesting. I was a skeptic. I will admit I was a skeptic to this whole monster density thing, and honestly it felt really good to me. the little bit I've tried of it so far. Of course, I'll be playing more of it to get footage for this segment. Yes, we talked about Deckard Cain being able to identify all items in a player's inventory. You see, you have rescued the last of the Horadrim. He will identify your stuff prior to croaking the bucket. Croaking the bucket? What a horrible phrase. Okay, so Deckard Cain can now identify all of your items once he's been rescued. And of course there is the Book of Cain, should Cain not be there for any reason. And the Book of Cain will be available in all acts by the stash. Cooldown incurred by changing skills outside of town on Inferno has been reduced to 30 seconds from 60. Gosh, why did they do that? Let's talk about that. It was originally decided to add that long cooldown, that 60 seconds, to make builds seem semi-permanent, because back in beta you could swap out pretty frequently, and they didn't like that you could basically swap things up, skills out all the time just by having your skill thing open. And so they added that cooldown, especially because people were saying, you know, hey, there was a lot of complaints about losing the skill trees. It's like, hey, we want permanent choices. It's like, okay, well, let's make it so that you can't change your skills without a penalty. So that's how that came from, and now they decided 60 seconds was a bit long, 30 seconds, especially in a game like this. Thinking about the 30 seconds kind of makes sense. The game's been made easier for Inferno. I really don't think there's hardly even a reason to keep it, you know, other than to stop you from swapping in the middle of combat. Alright, there's now an option in video settings to lock the cursor to the window when it's in full screen windowed mode. That's kind of nice. I have accidentally slipped out of my window from that before. Okay, so they're changing multiplayer co-op. Players now receive a 10% bonus to Magic Find, Gold Find, and Experience per additional player in a multiplayer game, up to a maximum of 30% in a 4-player game. So you are going to get buffs to Magic Find, Gold Find, Experience if you're in a party. So this goes back to the changes they made before when they took out the monster damage increases per monster power, or per player level, or sorry, per amount of players in your game, and of course the health bars of enemy monsters. And they felt that these were a good start, but people still kind of tend to do their own thing solo. So they wanted to make it so that group play now is more rewarding, so they're giving you a 30% buff. Please keep in mind that this is multiplicative. Magic Find and Gold Find can exceed their 300% caps now. Experience bonuses can stack with other bonuses from items and monster power. And when I say this is multiplicative, I mean that if, and this is for shrines too, Nephilim Valor, Monster Power, Players, Shrines, these now multiply with your existing Golden Magic Find. So if you've already hit like a major number, a cap, so say for example you get 10% per player, right? You're in a full party, so you're getting 30%. You might think, oh, that's just going to add 30. If I've already got 100% Magic Find, it'll be 130%. Well, in that example, yes, because it's multiplicative. But let's say you had... let's just say you had 200% Magic Find, okay? You're not just going to get 230, you're going to get 260 because it's adding 30% or multiplying 30% by that existing amount. So what that means is that Experience Shrines, Nephilim Valor, and in parties are going to gain you more Magic and Gold Find the more of it you already have. So it basically makes it more important to be on a higher level of monster power with a party with Shrines and Nephilim Valor. And that's kind of cool that they're doing that. But I almost wonder what the end goal of all this is going to be, considering all the efforts they've made to make Magic Find not as useful. Because that almost makes it seem like people are going to want to start getting more Magic Find again in order to get higher multiplicative levels with lower amounts of monster power. We'll have to see on that one. I'm not sure what to think about that change so far. A notification is now sent to all players in multiplayer game whenever a party member engages an elite monster or treasure goblin in combat, and their location will be shown on the mini-map. In addition, an icon will appear over a player's banner in town to warn other players that they're in combat with an elite monster. So that's kind of cool. They talked about that with especially treasure goblins. Pings will be shown on the map so you can tell where it is. So if you're playing in a group and you're kind of spread out, you will know that there is that creature there. If someone engages an elite, you know to go and help them out and things like that. So basically what they're doing is automating communication. So rather than stopping and trying to type, especially if your life's in danger, it's just going to ping it for you. And that's kind of cool. I mean, you might think it's oversimplifying things and whatnot, but the truth of the matter is communication in a team game can be key. and the less you have to do to stop and type, especially if you don't have chat communication, honestly, that really helps people. Oh, wow. Okay, so moving on. Tooltips in the auction house now show for comparison. People have been wanting that. That's great to hear. BattleNet's received some changes here. Players will be able to search for games that were started on any quest once they've reached level cap. Matchmaking tags have been added. So this is kind of the public game system that Diablo 2 had. The matchmaking tags are basically a way to search not only for difficulty, monster power, and quest, but now you can search for things like, well, no tag, which is obviously nothing, questing, brawling, and Keywarden. So if you're looking for a PvP, you simply put the tag brawling, and it will find a brawling game for you. So it's almost like the public game system that Diablo 2 had, where you could make your own name, except for instead of giving you that full ability, you will have a tag that you can put it on. It's almost like putting a tag on a video on YouTube or something. If you're looking for something specific, you do a search for it, and there it is. Lots of changes to the social stuff. Players can add notes to a friend by right-clicking. That is useful, especially when you're looking at someone that's not a real friend, a real ID friend, and you're trying to remember why you added them. Maybe it was a particular game. Maybe they were offered to trade you something. It's nice to be able to right-click and add a note to say, hey, this is who this person is. Or maybe it's a friend that doesn't want to add you as a real ID and you want to add their name to it anyway. You can enter player broadcast messages. That's functionality that existed in StarCraft 2. Nothing really exciting there. Players can now create multi-user conversations. So you basically open the public chat options and you select invite friends and you get a conversation going. I don't even really care about that functionality. About the only thing I can see that being useful for is if you had more than 4 friends that aren't in your party, and you created a chat room so you could all chat across your games rather than having to be in the party. So that's cool. I mean, it's there. I don't think it's any earth-shattering event or really super important, but you know what? It's kind of nice to have, I guess. If you've got 8 friends and you're splitting your parties in 2, you can create a chat room of sorts that you can all still talk in. So that's cool. It's there. It's not quite guild chat or anything, but it's close. A new section added to the friends list called Players Near You. This is pretty much just a way to find players that are on your local network. So what would that be useful for? I don't know, college dormitories, LAN parties, internet cafes, things like that. You can basically do that and say, hey, who's on a network near me? All right. In a move that seems to be borrowed from WoW and almost completely useless in Diablo is the party guide. The party guide is assigned to the first person who joins a public game. Multiple characters join a public game at the same time. The game will choose the hero with the highest level or paragon level to be party guide. When a party guide leaves the public game, a new one will be chosen. Alternatively, party guide can right-click on a party member's portrait, pass them party guide title. Party guide will have a unique icon that appears on the mini-map. Which, okay, that's your party leader. And the thing is, it doesn't really give you any different functionality other than what you already have. I am not entirely sure. Back in World of Warcraft, it kind of made sense. You had a little leader tab, but that was because in instances, you kind of needed someone that knew how to run the instance, and it was always nice to have someone that did that chose the leader tab so that they could walk everyone through it. And in Diablo, it just doesn't seem necessary. All right, what else? So class changes. There's a few of these. In fact, the PTR has been updated twice since I'm reading you the original patch notes. It's been updated twice. Really, and this is why people didn't think there was much going on with this patch, because there's only a minor change to classes, and only the wizard had class changes. The Archon, duration of Archon should be extended by assists from players in multiplayer games in addition to kills, which is a major change, by the way, and this is one of those reasons why wizards would not play in groups. If you're doing a critical mass build with Archon, if you weren't getting or it's not so much, I'm sorry, that one's not regarding critical mass, but it's regarding extending it by the kills, right? And other skills are like this, not just Archon. You can lower the cooldown, or you can get a benefit by killing monsters. And if you didn't get the killing blow in a multiplayer game, why would you want to play in a multiplayer game? Because your build, which is based upon getting killing blows, is now useless. This is a step in the right direction. Archon will now get extended assists, or extended by the assists rather than just a kill. So they need to do that with other skills that depend on kills. If you helped kill that monster, you assisted in it, you should get the benefit. Otherwise, people are still going to play by themselves if they have builds like Teleport may now teleport to any location within range as long as a path is available. And fixed a bug causing teleport safe passage to only reduce damage from physical attacks. So, and that was it. That was all the changes to classes. But there's been a lot more since then, and we're going to go over that because there's some really interesting stuff here. Okay, so crafting. Players can now craft multiple items and gems at one time in the same tier. As long as you possess the necessary materials, you can craft items using materials located in the shared stash. Oh, well, hey. That's nice. I completely missed that the first time I read this. Okay, so players can now craft items using materials in the shared stash. I don't have to go and pull materials out of my stash anymore. If you've ever watched my videos, you've seen that I have a whole bunch of items sitting in my stash. I gotta pull them out if I want to use them. Now I don't. Thank you. I think that's a move inspired almost out of Guild Wars. That's beautiful. I love that. I love that. Okay, salvage item information will no longer be displayed in the chat log. And they fixed a bug preventing players from salvaging items by dragging it into the blacksmith anvil icon. Also, I don't believe this was in the last patch. You know, I didn't confirm it, but I noticed in my options there is a little checkbox that lets you disable that little box that says, hey, are you sure you want to disenchant this? You can turn that off. That's great. I'm happy by that, by the way. Let's see. Experience earned by completing a quest is granted to players that have reached level cap, so it'll be much easier to gain experience in the game now by completing events. You know, they originally turned that off because there was no point in getting the experience, and then they added Paragon, and they never turned it back on. So that's cool to see. Okay, in something that we talked about last Diablo Digest is the user interface. Maximum of 8 buffs and debuffs will now be displayed on the UI. The maximum number of debuffs that will be displayed is 3. So a total of 8, only 3 debuffs. So if you've got 3 debuffs, you can only show 5 buffs. It's a step in the right direction. We're actually going to see more, but I still wonder why they don't just outright let us have it all if we want to have it. Let that be our decision. Hey, they finally fixed the bug that prevented damage from being displayed if a monster was affected by hex. That's been around for a few patches now. Okay. So yeah, those are those changes that happened originally. Since then, there's been 2 updates to the PTR. The update that happened here looks like the 15th of April. Let me make sure that was the 15th of April. They've made some pretty nice changes to skills that, quite honestly, seemed kind of useless before. Let's start with the Demon Hunter. Rapid Fire. The base weapon damage has been practically doubled from 276 weapon damage to 438. So what they're doing is they're taking these abilities that you have to channel and stand still for, and they're making them useful. As a Demon Hunter, players don't want to stand still. They want to fire off their elemental arrow or otherwise. And they want to keep moving. And it's something that's been a problem. Unless you're building a tank build, or maybe you're doing Gloom and you're getting life back on your hit, you're not going to sit there and use your rapid fire, more than likely. Now that its damage has practically been doubled, I can see a tanky Demon Hunter being very viable with that. Here's another change to that, is the hatred cost while channeling has been reduced to 6, down from 10. So now not only does it hit harder, but you can channel it longer. Let me see, skill runes related to that. Bombardment weapon damage went from 345 to 414. The explosion radius was increased from 8 to 8 yards from 4. The skill rune fire support, the weapon damage of homing rockets was increased from 35 to 145%. Fire support for rapid fire, the weapon damage of homing rockets, again, has been increased from 35 to 145. That's, I have, like, 5 times the damage now? That might make a rocket build even more viable now. I made rocket builds with my turrets, but I didn't really use the rapid fire rune because I felt like the rocket damage just wasn't worth it, even with ballistics. I'm going to have to make a new build. I might just have to make a rocket build. Withering Fire reduces the initial cost of hatred to 10, up from 5. Okay, so Withering Fire increases the cost, the initial cost, but I think it reduces the sustain cost. It's kind of hard to say on that one. It's not all there. Some of these changes were not quite finished when they hit the PTR on this set of notes that I'm reading, and they will be updated on the next set. So let's move on to the Wizard. What happened to the Wizard? Once again, channeling abilities getting an upgrade. Arcane Torrent base damage pretty much, well, no, this one it wasn't double. The base damage was brought from 210 to 285. Arcane Minds weapons damage was brought from 180 to 340, and Cascade weapon damage increased from 210 to 285. So not as much of an increase there. The Demon Hunter obviously got a doubling effect on the channeled ability. Wizard's Arcane Torrent probably already seen as fairly strong, so they buffed it a little bit, but not a lot. Disintegrate also got a buff. The base damage increased from 170 to 220, and of course all related runes also increased by a partial amount. Entropy and Intensify, if you use those, weapon damages have been increased. Also, the Witch Doctor. So this is nice. Fire Bats was a nice skill for the Witch Doctor, but just never really seemed to have a place. Not a lot of people used that one as far as I could tell. What they did to Fire Bats in this patch and continued on to the next, or sorry, in this PTR build, continuing on to the next build, is they increased the initial cost of Fire Bats, but they reduced the sustain cost. So Fire Bats is going to act a lot like Rapid Fire for a Demon Hunter. Whereas before it was a constant cost from start to finish, it is now a higher cost to start, but you can channel it longer. This is important though, because if you think about it, the Witch Doctor's resource is based around a constantly regenerating source of mana. If the cost to channel that ability is low enough, it doesn't matter if the initial cost is higher, because you can channel it for quite a while because you are getting a sustained amount of mana back, either through class items or through passives. Let me go ahead and pull up the next notes for the next patch for the Witch Doctor so we can give you an actual amount here of what's going on. Fire Bat's base weapon damage has been increased from 180 to 385. So they pretty much took like the Demon Hunter and doubled it. Cloud of Bats initial damage increased as well, 234 to 500 weapon damage. And Plague Bats maximum damage increased from 270 to 578. 578? A lot. A lot. So yeah, that's going to make those skills much more viable now. Disintegrate, Torrent, Rapid Fire. Ray of Frost is actually in that. Let me pull that up. Wizard, Ray of Frost. Base weapon damage of that went from 215 to 280, so it did get a little bit of love, not near as much as either Disintegrate or Rapid Fire or Fire Bats. The Ice Patch weapon damage was increased for Black Ice. Sleet Storm was increased from 280 to 364. Not bad for the close range. Not sure if that will still find a niche or not. Slow Blast, maximum damage increased as well, from 280 to 364. So yeah, good changes there to these channeled abilities that feel like they didn't have a place before. Everything in this game really came about kiting. If you stood still, you were going to get surrounded and die. If these channeled abilities actually do a lot of damage, I think that's what they're designed to do, right? You sit there and you have to channel something, so you're sacrificing movement. What's the point of sacrificing movement if the skill you're using just doesn't hit hard enough and is going to get you killed? So it sounds like that's where they're going with this. Now, this patch notes mentions the monster density changes. We already talked about that. Hit points per monster increase from players that are joining multiplayer games. Used to be they got 70% of their hit points increase per player. Now it's only 50. So that goes hand in hand with the notes we talked about where you get more experience in Magic Find. Now also the monsters are not as strong as you add players. So much more group-oriented changes here in this patch coming up. Tormented Stingers and Stygian Crawlers have had their experience reduced by 75%. This is important for people that farm those areas for experience. I believe that affects the Alkaiser run. Damage dealt by Tormented Stingers has been reduced by 75%. Experience gained by Shadow Vermin has reduced by 50%, and chances for Shadow Vermin to drop loot has been reduced. So that's important. Unfortunately, those don't mean much to me because I didn't really follow any prescribed routes. But again, I do believe that will affect some of the more popular routes that are out there for experience and possibly even item find. Now, here's something that's really nice that they've added. One, Keywardens will only appear in Inferno difficulty, and I'm very happy for that because, quite honestly, it felt really weird to have Keywardens show up in my normal and Nightmare games. Especially when Nekarat, the damn Keywarden in Act 4, chased me down in friggin' normal and nightmare. And that guy hits like a truck. I hate that guy. And I'm glad that he's now only going to be Inferno. Add to that, though, even though I hate Nekarat, he's going to be much more useful now. You see, each Keywarden, right, drops a key. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. They all drop keys. What does the Act 4 one drop? Oh, he drops the plans, right? Okay, he drops the plans for you being able to make the Infernal Machine. Once you get that, why ever bother with Nekarat again? Run away from him, or don't fight him, or just kill him for experience or loot, maybe, I guess. But really, the difficulty of the fight made him really not worth killing. Well, now Nekarat has a chance to drop a random key, either Destruction, Hate, or Terror, in addition to his Infernal Machine plans. And those are separate rolls, by the way. The Infernal Machine plans will have a separate roll to drop. If he drops a key, it will not replace the plans. So don't think that if you don't have the plans, you're going to miss out. So that actually gives people that like to farm Act 4, I don't know who that is, or farm maybe Nekarat, that gives you a reason to kill him. You get a random key out of it. That's not bad. Maybe you could form some kind of route around that. I don't know. But yeah, now there's a reason to kill Nekarat. And so as of the 18th, which about 5 days ago, I think, according to my watch right now, another update. And this one is really interesting. They are increasing the healing of all healing skills. I mean, they're doubling them. I talked about doubling the channel abilities. They're doubling healing again. I wish I could remember what the last major healing change was. I remember there was a major change in healing. I forget if they buffed it or nerfed it. But that was back when Inferno was still really tough. So it's interesting to see that they're changing it again. Just to give you an idea, let's take a look at Warcry. The skill rune Invigorate regenerates 620 life, up from 310. The passive Inspiring Presence. Barbarians are going to be a massively overpowered boon to groups. Inspiring Presence regenerates 4% of your maximum life per second, up from 2%. Not only that, but it affects all party members. You can now give 4% maximum life per second to everybody around you by using Inspiring Presence and a War Shout. Seriously. That's insane. So now not only is Inferno a little bit easier, but it's the healing abilities are better. And you know what? I think I like this change to healing abilities, because what I used to do when I was building defensive is I doubled up on healing abilities at times. Like, for example, I might have had Overpower give me health back while at the same time using Rend. Or maybe I had Overpower give me health back while also using some other ability that gave me health. Or combined it with Life on Hit, right? I would have Life on Hit and an ability that healed and blah-de-blah. Now it's making it so that now that everything's doubled, if you were doubling up on healing skills, you know, as a monk, let's say you were using, you know, Breath of Heaven or something like that with other healing-based abilities, maybe now you will change one of your healing abilities out to a damage ability or something like that. So I think they're trying to make the healing stuff a little more relevant without being restrictive. I would actually like to hear more input on this, because you have to keep in mind I don't play as much as I used to, and I still, you know, try to take time to sit down and play. Of course, I've been very busy lately. This is also why the Diablo Digest took a month to come out, aside from other coverage I had to do. It's just been fairly busy around here. So, but I do still enjoy playing the game. But I'm fairly casual about it. I don't go out and I don't have the best loot, which is also what inspires me to make builds that aren't based around efficiency. They're based around fun. And I like it because it could make me actually choose a healing skill and not feel like I'm jilted out of something. Like, I might actually make a build that's not using Rend anymore if I could get the healing from some of these abilities and try it out. Maybe I might switch to Hammer of the Ancients. That would be kind of cool. I'd never really used that build before, and it would be nice to still have some kind of defense. Continuing on, just to give you an idea, again, Demon Hunter Companion, Boar Companion regenerates 310, up from 155. The Aid Station Sentry gives you 2% maximum life per second, up from 1. The passive Brooding regenerates 2% life per second, up from 1. Mantra of Healing now causes party members to regenerate 620 life, up from 310. The Skill Rune Sustenance, oh boy, listen to this one. Increases Mantra of Healing's life regeneration to 1,000 1,240 per second, up from 620. 1,240 for the Sustenance Skill Rune and Mantra of Healing. That is a lot of healing. Oh my goodness, is that a lot of healing. Oh hey, they increased the damage bonus on Guiding Light from 16 to 20%. So whenever you use a direct skill on another player, you and the other player deal 20% additional damage. Oh, nice. Already talked about the fire bats. Blood Ritual regenerates 2% life, up from 1. Yeah, all of them pretty much doubled in healing. That includes the Vigor and Familiar for the wizard, Galvanizing Ward for the wizard's passive, and even the Templar. His loyalty ability regenerates 310 life, up from 155. Wow, so just to round it off, we're going to the last of the patch notes here. The damage dealt by the fire pool left by Blazing Guardian attacks has been reduced by 50%, but the minimum damage has been increased. And then there's a few bug fixes where monsters with Avenger affix now properly gain 25% damage each time a monster in their pack dies, and monsters with the Vampirics affix now constantly heal for 200% of their damage done in all difficulties. There you go. That is the patch notes, and like I said, hopefully I will have footage in the background if I've done my job. Future self, you had better get this footage for me. Oh my god. Yeah, so I'm pretty much cutting this off here. It's not near as long as the last one. That last one was about an hour and a half. This is about an hour 15, it looks like. Another long talk, but hey, it's okay. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. I know this is kind of a combination thing. I'm hoping that the branding this patch notes with the Diablo Digest has worked out. I'm interested in your feedback, please. I'm trying to make this something interesting. I always cover the patch notes and PTRs, but I feel like it would be better to brand it with Diablo Digest because that makes it a better recognized brand for people to come out and look for. So let's see how this works. I want your feedback. I want to know what you think. Obviously, please engage in any discussions you want. If you have feedback that takes longer than whatever character limit YouTube has, please feel free to email me at theshadowpost@gmail.com. I am actively monitoring that email again since I'm using it, especially in giveaways now. Again, that is theshadowpost@gmail.com. And please leave me whatever you want, suggestions. That's fine. I really look forward to it. Ladies and gentlemen, this has once again been Diablo Digest, the second of a possibly ongoing series. And I'm KageKaze, and I'll be seeing you next time.